Welcome, friends, to this Pride Week celebration. With that setup, let me launch into this week's message or conversation. And it comes in the midst of a difficult week, indeed. So, friends, at the conclusion of last week's story from the book of First Kings, we heard how the prophet Elijah had been challenged by God to move beyond his fear so that he could go out into the world and get about the business that God had for him, that being anointing a new king. So this week's reading picks up, well, sort of, where we left off last week. King Ahab, the king whose wife Jezebel had scared Elijah off in the first place, was now dead, having been killed in battle with the country of Aram. And the northern kingdom of Israel was in a little bit of chaos, for Ahab's son, Ahaziah, who had succeeded him, had only lasted 2 years on the throne himself before he died. And the turnover that was going on societally wasn't just limited to the monarchy. No, in today's story, we hear about another transition, that between one prophet and another, from Elijah to Elisha. So listen carefully as I read this week's story, which is set at a time of gut-wrenching upheaval, much like our own. For I believe buried within the passage is at least one nugget of wisdom that can help us find our way forward these trying days. 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 2, and then continuing with verses 6 through 14. And I'll be sharing the story from the Common English Bible. Now the Lord was going to take Elijah up to heaven in a windstorm, and Elijah and Elisha were leaving Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here because the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elijah said, "As the Lord lives, and as you live, I won't leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Continuing. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here because the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elijah said, "As the Lord lives and as you live, I won't leave you." So again, both of them went on together. 50 members from the group of prophets also went along, but they stood off at a distance. Both Elijah and Elisha stood beside the Jordan River. Elijah then took his coat, rolled it up, and hit the water. Then the water was divided into two. Both of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "What do you want me to do for you before I'm taken away from you?" Elisha said, "Let me have twice your spirit." Elijah said, "You've made a difficult request. If you can see me when I'm taken from you, then it will be yours. But if you don't see me, it won't happen." They were walking along talking when suddenly a fiery chariot and fiery horses appeared and separated the two of them. Then Elijah went on to heaven in a windstorm. Elisha was watching, and he cried out, "Oh, my father, Israel's chariots and its riders." When he could no longer see Elijah, Elisha took hold of his clothes and ripped them in two. Then Elisha picked up the coat that had fallen from Elijah. He went back and stood beside the banks of the Jordan River. He took the coat that had fallen from Elijah and hit the water. And he said, "Where is the Lord, Elijah's God?" And when he hit the water, it divided in two. And then Elisha crossed over. And thus ends our sacred story. So, having now heard the story for yourself, again, I would ask you to consider, what is that one nugget of wisdom that might be buried within it, which could help us find our way. Well, if you haven't figured it out, let me see if I can help. That nugget for me is found in verse 10 of today's reading, the one that immediately follows Elisha's request to receive two helpings of Elijah's spirit. For you see, Elijah could have responded to Elisha's request by immediately granting it. That's what we would expect from a man of God, right? A spirit of generosity. But he didn't. Instead, Elijah attached a condition to this transfer when he said, "If you can see me when I'm taken from you, then it will be yours. And if you don't, it won't." So why did Elijah do that? Why did he miss the chance to be generous and simply give Elisha what he wanted? Why did he put this condition on it? Well, Elijah lived about 3,000 years ago, so I can't really sit down and ask him, but I want to use a modern example to get at why I think Elijah may have handled it that way. And this modern example I want to use today is that of voting rights. Over the last 18 months, many of us progressives have understandably been up in arms, for we have heard about so many attempts throughout the country, but in the South in particular, to make the act of voting so much harder. And we were furious because deep in our hearts, we just knew that the easier we made it for a person to get a ballot and vote, that the more likely they would be to do it, right? Well, let's fast forward to the spring of 2022. On May 24th of this year, the voters of the great state of Georgia went to the polls. And just 2 weeks later, the voters from California went to the polls as well. Now, the state of Georgia had some of the most restrictive voting policies in place that you can imagine, even making it a crime to offer food or drink to those waiting to vote. And California, on the other hand, had the least restrictive approach to voting. In fact, not only did every voter in California have a ballot sent to their home, even the return envelopes for those ballots had the postage paid. So given this discrepancy, I was wondering how the rate of voting compared in the state of Georgia and California. Well, in California, taking Los Angeles County specifically where we are, the turnout of eligible voters was just 24.4%. And that was a decrease of 50% in the number of primary votes the year before, when voters had gone to the polls to determine the fate of Governor Newsom. So things went very badly in terms of voting turnout in California. But what about in Georgia? Well, the early voting figures were tallied. And by early voting, I mean the 3 weeks leading up to the actual date of the election. They found that the total number of ballots submitted rose by 168% over the primary 4 years earlier, back in 2018. And when they compared it to the most recent primary, back in 2020, the turnout was even higher, 212% greater. And friends, that lesson in voting rights is a challenge to our assumption about how things work in the world. For you see, Elijah must have known that if he had simply given that double portion of spirit to Elijah like he asked, if he just made it as easy as it was for the voters in Los Angeles County, he feared that Elisha might have grown complacent, entitled, and not even appreciated what it is that he had received. So by forcing Elijah to do something, to be alert and on guard for his departure, Elijah ended up drawing out something in Elisha that Elisha probably never even knew was there. And I use this point, friends, in the midst of a difficult week when so many of us are tempted to give up because of the decisions that have been made by the Supreme Court. But you know what? This week, it is now our turn to make an important decision, to ask ourselves, will I give in to despair and hopelessness and abandon the quest for justice? Or will I do what Elisha and the voters of the great state of Georgia did? Will I decide to rise up, work harder than ever before, and claim that which God has rightfully given me? What decision will you make? Friends, on a Sunday when we celebrate LGBTQIA plus Pride Month, as well as the birthday of our beloved denomination, the United Church of Christ, I want to close my time with you this morning by sharing a 4-minute and 48-second taped message by a man who happens to be a personal friend of mine, Bill Johnson. Now, Bill was a gay man who was born in the year 1947. In fact, the very same year that this church was born. And he was raised in Houston, Texas. Bill grew up attending his local congregational church, and he had a deep and abiding love for two things: God and God's people. And relatively early in life, he felt a strong call to serve God's beloved in ministry. But there was a problem. Never before had an openly gay man been ordained into Christian ministry in the United States. So knowing that, Bill could have done what so many before him had done: given up, chosen another vocation because it was hard. But he didn't. And because of Bill's tenacity, 50 years ago, on June 25th, 1972, Bill gathered with representatives from local churches in the Golden Gate Association, right here in the great state of California, and made history when he became the first openly gay man ordained in U.S. history. So in the midst of a difficult week, when everything seems stacked against us, when we are tempted to give up, Bill has a powerful message for us. A message not just about our past, nor even our present, but also our future. So listen now to Bill's words and see if they can help you do what Elisha did. Pick up your mantle.
Hi, I'm Bill Johnson. Happy Pride Month. On June 25th, 1972, I became the first openly gay person ordained to the Christian ministry in the history of the Christian church. I was 26 years old. This year marks the 50th anniversary of that historic decision by the Golden Gate Association of the Northern California Nevada Conference of the United Church of Christ. Over the past 50 years, I have devoted my life to pastoral care, community organizing, and education on behalf of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer people, many of whom suffered physical and spiritual violence in church, in their families, and in society. Many of you answered the urgent call of the UCC General Synod to make the United Church of Christ a more inclusive communion. Also in 1972, I founded what is today the United Church of Christ Open and Affirming Coalition. This year we are celebrating the Coalition's 50th anniversary as well. We led the way among denominations for the full inclusion of LGBTIQ people. In the past 50 years, tens of thousands of UCC members have come out publicly, and often with spouses, children, and other family members, have found a spiritual home in the United Church of Christ. Many of our local churches have publicly declared their open and affirming commitment, warmly welcoming LGBTIQ people and their loved ones. Thank you. Thank you very much, members of the United Church of Christ. In 2005, the UCC General Synod declared its support for legalizing same-gender marriage, long before the U.S. Supreme Court decision that legalized such unions. We have shared a prophetic journey, liberating and enriching lives, and we should rejoice. But today, as repressive forces threaten the civil liberties of so many, our witness for justice is needed more than ever before. It appears Roe v. Wade will be overturned. Voting suppression is commonplace, threatening our democracy. We can see clearly that the regressive forces in America have their sights on ending same-gender marriage, on criminalizing contraception, on ending the right to privacy, and criminalizing homosexuality itself. Civil liberties that we have long thought secure are under organized attack. Friends, our justice work must continue with renewed commitment and energy. I urge you to strengthen the witness of our United Church of Christ Open and Affirming Coalition with your financial support through individual memberships and through the annual budget of your congregation. If your church is not yet open and affirming, begin the process to make it so. Work to elect justice advocates at all levels of government. In these regressive and repressive times, many people need strength for the journey. As we always have, let us continue our historic United Church of Christ commitment to justice, peace, sustainability, and a world where all may be one. Thank you for all you do. Blessings on your important ministries. May God bless us, each one.
So thank you, Bill, for having picked up the mantle when it was presented to you. And for each of us as we go forth, may we follow Elisha's and Bill's examples and pick up our mantle as well as we continue the work of justice, of peace, and inclusion. Go with God. Amen.